And this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, the iPhone 8 has officially been on the market for the last few days, but suppliers aren't feeling the love. Shares have died for vendors on the supply chain of the world's most valuable company. We look into what is driving the slump. Plus, Deliveroo beefs up its war chest as the food fight brewing in the crowded deliveries market heats up. We'll hear from one of the British startup's earliest investors and now board member who will join us to discuss the latest funding round. And she became the face of the fight against gender discrimination in Silicon Valley. Ellen Pao joins us to discuss her new book on her high-profile lawsuit and moving the needle on diversity in tech. But first, to our lead. Consumer excitement surrounding the release of the iPhone 8 and the latest versions of the Apple Watch and Apple TV hasn't quite translated to Apple's suppliers. If you take a look at the Bloomberg terminal using the function #BTV291, you can see how Honhai, aka Foxconn, which assembles the iPhone and other Apple devices, has fallen as much as 10% since Apple's new product unveiling earlier this month. Taiwan's Pegatron and South Korea's LG Initech have plunged more than 12%. What could be causing the slump? Well, Apple has reportedly told component suppliers to delay part of their shipments for the production of iPhone 10 devices. That's a report in DigiTimes. Joining me now from San Francisco to discuss, our Bloomberg tech reporter Alex Webb, who covers all things Apple. Analysts are saying iPhone 8 orders are substantially lower. We have this report from DigiTimes about the iPhone 10. What do we make of all this?
The problem was that we're not comparing apples to apples, so it's very hard to know, and there was no pun intended there, I assure you. But people don't know how you're comparing it to last year. They've staggered the release of these two items. So on the one hand, they're saying iPhone 8 orders are slow and buying is slow, and then this new report from DigiTimes seems to suggest Apple's not expecting to ship as many iPhone 10s at launch date. Now, it could be that that's not reflecting demand. It could be that Apple often tries to constrain supply a little bit. That might be the implication in order to say we have sold out, and it makes it really hot device and builds up the expectation for it. But secondly, they could still also be short of OLED, the organic light emitting diode technology which is in the screens, and therefore they just can't make enough.
Now, if indeed the iPhone 8 sales aren't going so well so far, it could be a good sign, it could be a bad sign, right, for the iPhone 10? We don't know.
Exactly.
It could mean that people are holding out for the iPhone 10.
Exactly.
Or that they just don't want a new iPhone at all.
It's really tea leaves. There's also the idea that perhaps some people who want to buy an iPhone 8, they are going to wait and see the iPhone 10, and then if they decide, oh, it's not really worth the extra $300, they will still buy an iPhone 8. So the first indication really is when we start to see the earnings numbers in this quarter and the subsequent one, and we can see the mix inferred or implied by the average sales price.
So what do you make of what we're seeing with the suppliers in particular?
I think it seems to me there might be some sort of profit taking in the market. This Apple stock has been on a real tear this year in expectation for the device, and people are therefore interpreting it as, well, this is as good as it's going to get. The indication of a little bit of weakness in iPhone 8 therefore means well, it's a good time to get out the stock.
So what about some of these other products, the Apple TV, the watch? Do we know yet?
No, and the odds are we're never likely to, because they don't break these things out. The only moment where we will know that the Apple Watch is really becoming significant is when they start breaking out those sales, and there's no indication they're going to do that just yet. And let's not forget that these products are far smaller in terms of revenue drivers than Apple's iPhone.
Absolutely. I mean, what are analysts saying about whether, the iPhone 10 is indeed going to cannibalize sales of the iPhone 8?
Well, the other way around. I think everybody, they want them to be selling the higher model, the iPhone 10. It's the big problem. Like, often when you go into these events or these new product launches, there's always a slight skepticism in the market. Or has the Apple bubble burst sort of thing? Are people still going to keep buying these products even though they're vastly expensive? And history tends to show they do. So maybe this $999 price point, maybe that will change it, but that's clearly what people are risking right now. There was a note this morning from Drexel Hamilton saying they would buy right now because of the declines in recent weeks.
All right, interesting. Okay, we're going to talk about this a little more. Alex Webb, our Bloomberg tech reporter, thank you so much. After paying $800 for an iPhone 8, the last thing you might want to do is take that iPhone apart. But that is exactly what my next guest did. To get a look at the hardware inside. Joining me now to tell us what he found, Wayne Lamb, principal analyst for IHS Markit. And Wayne, you have looked inside every iPhone since the beginning of the iPhone. What struck you about the iPhone 8? What's different from the predecessors?
Hi, Emily. Yes, we have had about 10 years of experience looking into the design of the iPhone. And I think what the iPhone 8 shows us is that there has been sort of an inflection point in the design evolution of the iPhone. And we've seen it with iPhone 7, and now we've seen it with iPhone 8. And we're seeing a lot more newer innovations, a lot more cost placed into these componentry to justify some of the new features that we're seeing. So for example, the iPhone 8 Plus, which we will release the teardown analysis for, has most likely the highest bill of material costs we've seen yet. And you can see a lot of the content a lot of the monetary content and the componentry content going into things such as memory, computing, camera, which yields a very good camera experience on the iPhone 8 Plus. So we're seeing this sort of evolution towards more and more feature sets. And I think it's a really, they're setting up for the next big jump in innovation with the iPhone 10 coming out in about a month.
In your findings, you talked about the incremental memory upgrades, but said that this phone is different. How so?
Yeah, so if you look at the history of the iPhone, and there's a period where iPhone memory, base memory, really hasn't changed. It stayed at about 16 gigabytes for about 7 years. And the reason for that is it's really how you look inside Apple's monetization strategy. That they sell you the base model at 16 gigabytes, so that the next incremental increase in storage would be 32 or 64, but it incurs a $100 premium. But the margin, rather the variable cost to Apple is probably less than 20% of that. So that had been their profit engine, so to speak. And what has happened over the past few... Yes, go ahead.
You know, there's been talk about Apple having handicapped the iPhone with respect to future LTE connectivity. Can you expand on that?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's my words coming back to bite me. No. I was mentioning how Apple is using dual sourcing the LTE modem, one from Intel and the other from Qualcomm. So the Qualcomm chipset in the iPhone 8 is actually a Cat16 or gigabit LTE. However, the Intel version is only about Cat 12. So in order to compensate for the two and kind of match the performance of the two, the RF front end had been designed in such a way that it doesn't take full advantage of the Qualcomm chip. So an analogy would be Qualcomm-based iPhones give you 10 lanes of highway traffic, but the RF front end only allows 8 of that to be operational. So that's sort of the handicap that we're seeing.
So last quick question, you know, the iPhone 10 is coming. What are you going to be looking at most closely under the hood of the iPhone 10 as compared to the iPhone 8?
Well, the iPhone 10, there's a big emphasis on the display, because that is something that is in very tight demand. AMOLED displays are something of a new novelty to Apple. They've used it in the Apple Watch, but they never implemented it in a smartphone. And for a display that large and that custom, they only have one supplier today, which is Samsung. So we'll be looking very closely as to how they control that cost and manage to implement it on the iPhone 10. And also the other componentry that is quite interesting is the TrueDepth ID. That essentially is the fruits of the purchase of PrimeSense. If you recall, PrimeSense is the technology behind the Microsoft Xbox Kinects. And what they've done is basically shrunk the Kinects down to something so small that fits on top of the phone that will enable things like facial recognition and so forth. So there's a lot of great technologies in there to take a look at.
All right, well, we'll be watching for your report on that. Wayne Lamb, principal analyst of IHS Markit, thank you so much for joining us. Coming up, food delivery startup Deliveroo just closed a new funding round that's pushing them to become one of the most valuable startups in the UK. We'll hear from an early investor that increased their stake next. And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV, weekdays 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. Uber's new CEO is already demonstrating a more diplomatic approach than his predecessor with how he's handling his first big challenge, the revoking of Uber's license in London. In an open letter, Dara Khosrowshahi said that you have my commitment that we will work with London to make things right and keep this great city moving safely. Uber has also said it will appeal the regulator's decision, threatened to take the city to court, and started an online petition that now has more than 750,000 signatures. In the meantime, Uber rival Lyft is looking to expand in London, that according to the Financial Times. Well, meal delivery service Deliveroo is now one of the most valuable startups in the UK after raising $385 million in its latest funding round. The company plans to use the infusion to improve its logistics and spread to new cities. But can Deliveroo keep on growing as the delivery business gets more competitive by the day? Joining me now for more, Martin Mignot, partner at Index Ventures in London. Index Ventures first invested in Deliveroo back in 2014, and Martin currently sits on the board. So, Martin, obviously you guys are very confident in the future of this company. $385 million, that's a lot of money. What's it going to be used for?
So, first of all, I want to say this is a great day for Europe, great day for great homegrown European tech companies. So, we first invested in the company 3 years ago, and when they had 8 employees, the CEO was still doing most of the deliveries by himself. So it's a very humbling and a great day for us in Europe. We're very proud and very humbled by what they've achieved. In terms of what the money is going to be used for today, 3 main things. The first one is going to be the rollout of their Edition business, which is an infrastructure of physical kitchen that they're using to enable restaurants to open to new zones and new area very quickly with zero capex. So it's quite revolutionary in the restaurant business. The second thing is going to be around tech and product improvements. Obviously, this is getting quite a technical business with a lot of routing algorithms improvement, and that's how you drive a lot of efficiency from the business. And then the third one, maybe potentially more geographic expansion. I mean, the business today is live in about 160 cities, we think there are many more to cover.
Now, as you say, Deliveroo has grown substantially, but there is skepticism about the food delivery business and the margins. And when you have giants like Amazon getting into the business, how do you see smaller startups faring in this very competitive world?
Yeah, I'd say having large companies coming to your space is in one way scary, but on the other way it kind of validates the size of the market, and I think that's really what we're seeing here. And one of the reasons why we've always been so excited about Deliveroo is really because of, one, the size of the opportunity. This is a giga market. The food takeaway market alone today is about $25 billion. But we see them as going after a way larger market, which is, one, the restaurant market, which is about $400 billion in the markets where they're live. And more importantly, in the grocery market, which is about $1.2 trillion. So, takeaway market today, $25 billion. The grocery market, $1.2 trillion in the 12 countries where Deliveroo operates today. I'm not even mentioning the US or China or any of the other large markets. So it's a very, very large market, and we are at the very, very beginning of that trend. They're just scratching the surface. That's what's amazing. It's only been 4 years for the company, and this is still the beginning, and people are shifting their behavior. And what we're seeing in the product very clearly is that the longer people have been using Deliveroo, the more active they are, because they are shifting their behavior from going to the supermarket, loading up with grocery, and cooking once or twice a week, to just using Deliveroo to order food much more frequently, and that's a shift in consumer behavior, and we believe that's just the beginning, and that's why the opportunity is so large, and that's why the company has been able to attract investors like us, but also like Fidelity and Tiro, which are obviously the best names you can hope for.
SoftBank, however, did back out of an investment in Deliveroo, in part because of competition from Uber and general skepticism about the space. I mean, what's your reaction to that?
I can't comment on any specific investor. I mean, every investor, have their own analysis. The reality is like having Turo and Fidelity investing at this stage, pre-IPO, puts you in a really, really strong position for the future growth of the business, and potentially, if you want to go public, they're a really great anchor investor to have. They are two of the best asset managers in the world, and I don't think any other investors really in the world could have been much better at this stage. So we're just very happy with the run as it happened.
Now, as I mentioned earlier, London authorities have revoked Uber's license to operate. Do you think that Uber will work its way out of this, and what is your reaction?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a shame, to be honest. It's quite disappointing. I do think, obviously Uber has had its challenges, but at the same time, at its core, it's a fantastic product. I think it's offering a lot of economic opportunities to a lot of people who didn't have it before. It's offering a great product for the users, and I think London and all cities in the world are better off by having Uber in their cities. The one thing I would say is that TfL, the Transport for London organization, I put themselves a little bit in a tricky place by in a sense building a monopoly for Uber until today, and by not really allowing new entrants into the markets, and and getting them to grow to a very large size. And London was one of Uber's most profitable markets. So I think the better approach would have been, one, to work with Uber on solving their issues, but also secondly open the market to more entrants, because this is the best way to offer the best service both to the consumers but also to the drivers.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if Lyft can make a dent in that market. All right, Martin Mignot, partner at Index Ventures, thank you so much for joining us this evening from London. All right, coming up, a new report says President Obama tried to give Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg a wake-up call about fake news after the U.S. election. Details next. This is Bloomberg. Just last week, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg outlined a plan to combat potential interference with elections. It is a far cry from his initial outlook on Facebook's role in the 2016 U.S. presidential election after the November results. Here's what he said at the time.
Personally, I think the idea that fake news on Facebook, of which it's a very small amount of the content, influence the election in any way, I think, is a pretty crazy idea.
Now, the Washington Post is reporting that President Obama personally reached out to Zuckerberg after that interview around that time to make an appeal about the threat of fake news. For more, we're joined by our Bloomberg tech reporter, Sarah Fryer, who covers Facebook for us. So, very in-depth Washington Post story about what was going on behind the scenes, that Facebook had some evidence of Russian espionage as early as June of 2016, so a few months before the election, but couldn't quite make sense of it and reported it to the FBI. What is your reaction to this story?
Well, it's interesting. In August, I actually had a conversation with the head of product for Newsfeed, and he was telling me just kind of casually that they were seeing that there was some issues with fake news on the platform. But at that time, everyone thought Hillary Clinton was going to be elected. It wasn't ringing alarm bells at the level that it did after the election, when people said, "Oh wait, like this may have been a really bigger effect on everyone's way of thinking about these candidates than we realized." And the Obama conversation, the in-depth reporting that we saw from the Post, really great story, shows just a little bit deeper the naivete from Facebook about how they could have impacted something.
Do you think President Obama had an influence on Facebook's response since?
I don't think it's just Obama. I think it's a lot of criticism across the board from people saying, Facebook, you need to recognize, you can't on one hand tell advertisers, hey, if you use our ads, you can change people's minds, you can get more Latino voters in this state, you can get more women voters in that state. You can't tell advertisers that on one hand, and on the other hand say, oh, all the information that's spread on our platform, there's no way it could have impacted the election. So I think that statement that Zuckerberg made is going to haunt him over and over until this is really solved. And we did see a very different Zuckerberg last week coming out and taking this much more seriously, saying that he doesn't want Facebook to be used to subvert democracy in any way. It's very strong.
Meantime, BuzzFeed is out with a report that Steve Bannon tried to infiltrate Facebook's hiring process. To what end?
Well, they wanted to figure out, according to BuzzFeed, whether the hiring practices favored people with a liberal persuasion over a conservative persuasion. It just goes to show how skeptical people are of Facebook as it becomes so much more powerful over all of our lives. They have more than 2 billion users right now. More than half the world's internet-connected population is on Facebook. They have such a profound impact on the way people interact with each other in society, the way they share information, that people have to be asking questions about it and coming up with their own theories about it, like Bannon is.
Right. Well, the heat is on for Facebook. We'll be watching to see, how this Russia investigation proceeds. Sarah Fryer, our Bloomberg tech reporter who covers Facebook, as always, thank you so much. Coming up, Ellen Pao opens up about her very public fight against sexism in Silicon Valley. We'll hear about life after the court case and the progress, or lack thereof, for women in tech. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Elisa Parenti in Washington, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's start with a check of your first word news. The tension and rhetoric between Pyongyang and Washington escalated further today with a direct threat on U.S. warplanes by North Korea's foreign minister.
Since the U.S. has made a declaration of war, we will have every right to make countermeasures, including the right to shoot down the United States strategic bombers, even if they do not come into our airspace.
Ri Yong-ho spoke days after fighter jets flew the closest to the Korean demilitarized zone for any U.S. plane this century in a deliberate show of force. The country's foreign minister says the UN Charter guarantees its right to self-defense. A spokesman for holdout Rand Paul says the GOP Kentucky senator remains opposed to the Graham-Cassidy bill. Paul's office says his primary demand is a major reduction in block grants to states with money to spend on health care, the central component of this latest repeal effort. Anthony Weiner has been sentenced to 21 months in prison for sending obscene material to a 15-year-old girl. He must report November 6 to begin serving. Weiner will also be subject to internet monitoring and must enroll in a sex offender treatment program. And a U.S. appeals court has partially lifted a judge's block on a Texas law targeting so-called sanctuary cities. Police can now honor federal requests to detain suspected undocumented immigrants arrested for non-immigration offenses. Sheriffs and politicians won't be arrested for opposing the ban. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti, and this is Bloomberg. It's just after 5:30 p.m. here in Washington, 7:30 now, Tuesday morning in Sydney. We are joined by Bloomberg's Paul Allen. He's got a look at the markets. Paul, good morning to you.
Good morning, Elisa. Well, we have ASX futures higher by 0.25% right now, although the resources sector may weigh. Take a look at the iron ore price. It was off again, now hovering just above $63 per tonne after sliding 12% in the past week. This is on expectations that China is going to reduce its steel output to curb pollution during the winter. Over in Japan, Nikkei futures traded out of Chicago pretty flat. Shinzo Abe, the Prime Minister, has called a snap election. No date has been named, but much of the talk is focused on October the 22nd. The Bank of Japan will also release minutes today of its July meeting. Previously, the Governor Haruhiko Kuroda has said low inflation means it's much too early to discuss a strategy to exit the easing program. Elsewhere, we're waiting on the Asian Development Bank to update its outlook. I'm Paul Allen in Sydney. More from Bloomberg Technology next.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Ellen Pao continues to make headlines. It has been 5 years since her trial against Kleiner Perkins became one of the most prominent cases of its kind in Silicon Valley. And while she may have lost the suit, she helped kickstart the conversation about gender equality. Now, Pao has written a book about her experiences called Reset: My Fight for Inclusion and Lasting Change. I spoke with Pao earlier and asked what her goal is in rehashing all these details now. Take a listen.
A big part of it was just having so many women and men come up to me and tell me how much my story had inspired them and how much it gave them comfort in the experiences that they had, how they had connected with it. And I wanted to give them all the facts and give them the whole story and to see if I could help other people through the writing of this book. And over time also to kind of give this kind of inspiring ending to what was a pretty terrible experience, that you can get through all of this and continue and have a career and move forward and also try to change tech and the business world.
You wrote in an op-ed in the New York Times that although a lot hasn't changed, the one thing that has is that people now acknowledge the problem of sexism in the industry. Do you think if you filed your suit today that the outcome would be different?
I don't know that we would be here if I hadn't filed suit, so it's hard to say, right? So we've changed the conversation. No longer are women forced to defend themselves. It's a much easier experience for people to say, I've been harassed or I've been discriminated against. People believe it. But I don't know, if it hadn't been for all these women who have come after me to share their stories, if we would be where we are today. But I do think somebody suing now has a much better shot.
We've seen so many allegations, a rash of, sexual harassment stories in venture capital, at Uber, SoFi. Has any of this surprised you, or are you just not surprised at all?
I think most people who are familiar with the highest levels of tech and venture capital have heard the stories. I think what's been surprising has been that so many people have now come forward to talk about them. I think it started with a bunch of women who have come forward in the last few years, and then with Susan Fowler coming out with such a detailed and specific blog post, and her being accepted and not being taken down. It's opened the door for more people to come forward and to change the conversation.
Susan Fowler catalyzed, entire investigation into Uber's culture. Travis Kalanick has resigned. What do you think went so wrong at Uber? How did it get to that point?
I think it's early on. I don't know the details, but I think what happens in companies is that you get this culture and you want to be hard driving and you want to push and you want to break all the rules, and that ends up not being limited to the business side. It ends up going into the personal side. It ends up going into your interactions with employees and your peers and the people who report to you, and you don't think the rules apply, so you just do whatever you want, and that ends up breaking down into illegal areas.
What do you think, what responsibility do VCs have, the VCs who invested in Uber have for, I don't know what it is, letting the bros or bro culture run wild?
I think they have a huge responsibility, and I think the investors in the VC funds also have a responsibility for letting the venture capitalists run wild. But the problem is you've got the fox guarding the hen house. So you've got people who don't have clean hands, who are trying to manage people and tell them, hey, you're not supposed to do these things, when they're doing them themselves. So, as the board member, you have a huge responsibility to the employees of the company, to the other shareholders, to make sure that the company is, a company that is operating within the bounds of the law and is building a culture that's going to help it be successful, and that is diverse and inclusive, because we know that generates better financial results, better products.
You go into incredibly fine detail about the boys club environment that you experienced at Kleiner Perkins, and not just sexist jokes, but racist jokes as well. If the culture is that broken, can it be fixed?
I don't know if the bigger companies and the older funds can actually be fixed, but I know in working through Project Include and through the Kapor capital teams that there are a lot of CEOs, there are a lot of founders who are really committed to diversity and inclusion, and they want to build companies that include everyone, that are, tied to the community, that are tied to their customer, and that are going to build the best products. So I have a lot of hope, because I think the next generation of companies that are successful will have this commitment to diversity and inclusion and will be inclusive across all of their activities. I don't know about, these funds that have been around for a while and talk about lowering the bar, as you've heard, and finding that next white male nerd. I mean, it's just, how do you change that attitude?
That said, I mean, you're referencing a comment that Mike Moritz of Sequoia made to me a couple of years ago. Venture capital firms like Sequoia, like Benchmark, they have one woman partner now. Andreessen Horowitz, still no women partners. Do you think that these male-dominated firms, though, are they actually going to be surpassed if they still have, quote, the best returns and the best reputation?
I know a lot of women and people of color who will not go meet with them because they don't think they'll be treated fairly. And if you look at the language, I'm lowering the bar to bring in people from different groups, they don't think that women or other groups are actually equal to the men that they typically invest in. So, how do you go and join, how do you let somebody like that invest in you and expect to get the same outcome as the other people that they're investing in, or as you would get with a different investor who actually believes that you are capable and as likely to succeed as other people?
Ellen Powell there, author of Reset, a partner at Kapor Capital. Coming up, more of my conversation with Powell, what she has to say about her time as the interim CEO of Reddit. Next. And a reminder of our interactive TV function. You can find it at TV Go on the Bloomberg. You can watch us live. If you miss an interview, you can go back to it. You can send our producers a message and play along with the charts that we bring you on air. This is for Bloomberg subscribers only. Check it out at TV Go. This is Bloomberg. Indian retailer Shoppers Stop is feeling the effects of the Amazon bump. Shares rose over 20% after forging a deal with Amazon that'll help boost revenue and add 25% more stores. Shoppers Stop will raise $28 million by selling a 5% stake to Amazon. The alliance is Amazon's first investment in a publicly traded retailer in India. It is also expected to help the company tap part of the 400 million monthly visitors to Amazon's online stores. Now back to my conversation with Ellen Powell, author of Reset and Kapor Capital partner. After she lost her historic gender discrimination case against Kleiner Perkins, she became interim CEO of Reddit, where she made bold but controversial moves to crack down on hate on the site. 8 months in, however, she was effectively forced to resign. I asked her what happened. Here's what she had to say.
I think we had a lot of change that had to happen. So Ishan came in a couple years before I did and really tried to transform the company. It was, a small startup with just mostly white men, started by 2 white men, and that culture was very strong of exclusion. And as Ishan came in, he brought in different people. All the women kept getting pushed out. I ended up joining and in I think 2013 and worked with Ishan to push a lot of change together. This was a group that didn't want mobile, right? So it was very conservative, very locked into the product as it was, and we were trying to bring it in to reach more people, to have more conversations. And I think, I think the change was really hard on the community. It was really hard on the employees, and it just took, it took a lot of effort to get to where we got at the end of that.
You made an effort to cut down on hate. You banned several of the most hateful subreddits, and there's some evidence to show that it actually worked. There's a study that came out that showed that they have significantly cut down on hate. Do you think that online harassment would be such a problem if more women had been involved in designing these systems in the first place?
I think if more women of color, and especially underrepresented women of color, were involved at higher levels, it would be completely different, because it's the people who get harassed the most who really understand how the systems work and really see all the ways it gets distorted into ultimately presenting a certain view and having that dominate the conversation. And if you can't come at it from that kind of minority, small group perspective, it's really hard to see everything that's going on.
So how would it be different? How would Twitter be different? How would Reddit be different?
Oh, I think people would have invested more in tools, would have invested more in community management, would have had different rules, would have taken down more of a content faster and banned more of the people in a more consistent way. But it's hard when you don't put enough resources because those problems scale with the user base. And if you're not putting in the frameworks and if you're not putting in the tools, it gets out of hand very quickly.
How much hope do you have for Twitter? I mean, can Twitter at this point, 10 years in, get its harassment problem under control?
I don't know. I know they're trying and they have made some incremental improvements, but I really do believe that it's going to take a lot of work to get rid of all of the harassment and make sure that everybody feels comfortable participating in the platform. I think they should ban Donald Trump. I think that's a huge problem, that he has this behavior that's very counter to the terms of service, and yet he continues to be given this huge platform to dominate and to encourage more of the same bad behavior.
So you think Twitter should ban Donald Trump?
I'm one of many people who believes that. It's not just me, and I think with good reason.
What's the reason?
He is harassing of people. He threatens people on the platform, and then he uses his influence to get people to harass other people on the platform.
What about the people who would come back and say free speech?
There's so many, it's such a red herring. I think there are many reasons why people say free speech. I mean, it's an easy thing. Then you can say whatever you want on the platform. And we saw on Reddit when you allow free speech, it's the people who are dominant on the platform who can bully everybody else off. And there's also an issue of, everybody limits some speech on the platform. You ban spam, you ban certain types of harassment. So people are not having complete free speech on the platform already. This is just driving the rules to protect people from getting harassed off the platform so you can have as many voices as possible. I think the purpose of free speech is to allow everybody to be able to have a voice, to have these conversations, and if one group is pushing everybody else off, you can have this free speech platform, but there are not many voices or opinions being represented.
So Senator Hannah Beth Jackson is planning to introduce a bill that would explicitly prohibit harassment in the venture capital industry. What's your take on the bill, or how optimistic are you that legislation could solve this problem?
I'm hopeful, right? I think everything else hasn't solved it so far. I think the shaming has started to help a little bit, like people coming out and saying this is not acceptable. You can't go on an airplane and experience what I experienced, which is people talking about porn stars, talking about sex acts, talking about prostitutes, right? That's not acceptable anymore, and now you know that, so you should change your behavior. But I'm hearing it's not changing quite yet, so we need something else to help, and everything I think will help, but I don't think that's going to be the one thing that prevents it, because these people do think that they're above the law. They don't think the law applies to them, so you need to keep pushing that public perception and pushing, and telling the stories. I think the most impactful thing is all of these women telling their stories.
On that last note, you mentioned the porn-obsessed CEO. We saw that also in the excerpt of your book. You don't mention his name. His name did come up in the trial. Why did you leave his name out? And what else did you leave out? I'm sure there's a lot that you didn't put in there for various reasons.
I wanted the book to be as fair as possible. So with the CEO, I don't know him that well. Maybe he had an off day. Maybe he was goaded into doing something by Ted. I just don't know. So I didn't want to have this one incident kind of this one experience for 5 hours be the way that I portrayed him to the whole public. I think I tried to be fair. I tried to keep people's families out of it. I tried to, I had a friend, and our view was like no collateral damage. So these, you have the people who are the protagonists and who are the main people that I interacted with and who held me back and who are holding a lot of other people back. And they were the people I wanted the story to focus on.
All right, Ellen Pao there, author of Reset and partner at Kapor Capital. Well, FX Networks is joining the pay TV boom by offering FX Plus. The paid service will offer hits such as American Horror Story and Atlanta without advertisements. FX Plus will be available to Cox Communications' 4 million customers. The move aims to prevent viewers from watching the shows on Amazon and Netflix. Netflix shares fell Monday, losing nearly 5%, posting their worst day since June. Coming up, WhatsApp blocked in China, the latest on China's online crackdown next. And this Tuesday, Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen will deliver keynote remarks on monetary policy at the NABE conference in Cleveland, Ohio. Bloomberg TV will have full coverage starting at 12:45 p.m. Eastern Time. This is Bloomberg. China has handed out fines to Tencent, Baidu, and Weibo for content violations. According to a statement, a cyberspace authority gave its, quote, highest fine to Tencent for failing to supervise WeChat as required by law. Meantime, the Beijing cyberspace office gave Weibo and Baidu similar fines after users posted ethnic hatred and other content. The statements from the cyberspace offices didn't give the amount of the fines. However, the troubles for chat services in China do not end there. Facebook's WhatsApp messaging service has now been largely blocked in China following a censorship crackdown by the government. That's according to the New York Times. This block is a huge setback for Facebook, which has been trying to re-enter the Chinese market for some time. And WhatsApp was the last remaining Facebook-operated service that worked in China until now. It's been happening gradually. Chinese censors began blocking video chats and photo messages using WhatsApp back in mid-July. For more, I want to get straight to Hong Kong, where Bloomberg's Chief North Asia correspondent Stephen Engel is standing by. So, Stephen, what do you make of this?
Well, it was almost inevitable, I would have to say, having lived in China for so many years, including the entire time that Facebook has blocked there. You kind of got to realize that the Chinese government is very serious about blocking these types of messaging services. And as you rightfully said, WhatsApp was the last of the Facebook apps or services that were still available in China. Now it seems as though it is no longer available. I was there in July when that first crackdown started happening, and I tried testing it, uploading photos or uploading videos, and it didn't work. I also tested it late yesterday when we started getting word that it actually had been blocked, the actual messaging part of the service of WhatsApp. I sent numerous messages to my wife, who is in Beijing right now. She always replies right away. She didn't. I even tested saying, listen, I'm about to spend lots of money. She would normally reply right back. She did not get it. So I have tested it. It is not necessarily working between the two of us. And yes, it is another step. Instagram, of course, Google, various services blocked, Facebook, a number of them no longer working in China.
So, well, that's when you know for sure, when you're threatening to spend money. What do you think is really behind this latest ban, if indeed it is a ban? I mean, is it the same reason that Facebook was blocked back in 2008 and hasn't been unblocked since?
Well, as you and I both know, since you lived in China as well, we are coming up to a very politically sensitive time in China with the 19th Communist Party confab, if you will, coming up next month. So they oftentimes slow these kinds of services down to a crawl, if not an outright ban. So, and VPNs, virtual private networks, which a lot of people use to get around the Great Firewall of China, they are being blocked as well. And then you, again, have this new cybersecurity law, which takes effect at the beginning part of next year, but is already starting to be implemented, where VPNs will be banned outright. And, Apple has already taken steps to remove VPN apps from the Apple Store. So a number of steps have been taking place as well. Earlier this month, in the first week of September, a new ban came down on WeChat message groups. So if you're the administrator of a WeChat group, you're responsible for the members and what those members post. So there's a lot of self-censorship going on. This is what the authorities want to do in China, get people to self-censor, and also they can still monitor. Keep in mind, WhatsApp had end-to-end encryption, so it looks as though authorities have found a way to break that encryption, whereas WeChat from Tencent is not encrypted and is highly censored.
So, speaking of that, if WhatsApp, who gains from WhatsApp's loss here? Is it WeChat? Is it Weibo? What are the services that might see a bump as a result of this?
Yeah, well, WeChat obviously is the predominant messaging service of choice by the Chinese, simply because it is available and it is not slowed down.
Stephen, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us from Hong Kong. Really appreciate you stopping by. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. We will see you tomorrow. I'll be live in New York.